Welcome to Lesson 2 in 10 to 15 things of what not to do and what to do to prevent the relationship that you love and desire from crumbling to pieces. And in this episode, we're going over one of the most powerful things that you will ever come across in your dating and relationships career. And that is understanding the victim mindsets. Now, I personally spent quite a bit of time trying to learn about this. And dare I say, there's going to be a lot more victim mindsets than the ones I'm about to reveal. But these ones, as I've come to understand, in a very brief manner, we're going to go over them. These are very crucial to wrap your head around. And so, to my surprise, this actually comes a lot from the manifestation community. But also to my surprise, from the very same community, they don't really focus in on these specific things themselves. They just kind of like say it as a passerby. For example, where is blame? That's surprising. I haven't written blame here, but blame is one of them. I suppose blame would just be basically victim mindset. But blame, for example, they'll mention blame. You hear any manifestation coach talk about blame, but never any episodes do they create specifically about blame, as far as I've seen. All right, so going over victim mindsets, what is a victim mindset? Well, a victim mindset can essentially categorize our focus towards anything that is outside of our control. Our focus is not on what we can control, it's all about what we can't control. And this is kind of the umbrella term for victim mindset. If you want to learn more about the victim mindset and building something called mental armor, some people have weird ass terminologies for it, like bulletproof vest or a bulletproof mind. But it basically just means mental toughness or secure mindset, mental armor, thick skin. And there's a probably a good reason we need to have some thick skin. You know, I'm a very soft person, right? I have a good feminine side to me. I'm very warm, open, welcoming, etc. But sometimes little things get under my skin. These days, I might not take personally, but old me, 5 years ago, I might have taken a little comment too seriously, and I might have been afraid and let that eat away at me, you know? So, external locus. Do not divert your attention to your external locus, primarily. You're allowed to look at your external locus, accept it for what it is, and just say, okay. You do have some influence over your external locus, because again, how you show up sets the stage moving forward, because in terms of systems theory and basically feedback loops, cycles, your component still affects components outside of control. So you do still have somewhat control over your external locus. But we don't need to worry about that. That's just going to be a byproduct. That's just going to be a side effect of us focusing on our internal locus. Now, what is our internal and external locus? Sure, I could draw a big picture of it, but it's basically just that. It's what's in your control. It's not what's outside of your control. So there are different types of locuses within different types of locuses, right? Internal primarily means within your heart and within your mind. So it's the deep within mental and spiritual within your control. But that's the internal version of your already established internal locus. Because in your already established internal locus, you also have an external locus within that internal locus, if that makes sense. Basically meaning you can pick up a cup of coffee and move it around. You can manipulate objects around you. And they have these ricochet and feedback loop of reactions to everything. Everything is receiving feedback from each other. If you want to learn a little bit more information about this, I recommend reading the book called Atomic Habits. And I think one of the earlier chapters talks about moving an object in a room, placing an object in a room, And the environment essentially has an impact on the way you think and behave, right? And you have somewhat control over that type of thing. Let's move over to the victim mindset again. Victim mindset primarily does blame things, right? But basically you identify as a victim. Do not, under any circumstance, identify as a victim. Now, personally, you might not inherently identify as a victim in itself per se, like me. But what you might do instead is you might do something more logical, which is identify with your suffering, which we talked about earlier. That's kind of what the victim mindset really does. You identify and you immerse yourself in your suffering and you wallow in your woes and you wallow in your pain. And that is what the victim mindset does. And it likes to keep you there. So we must not do that. We must not do that because it's extremely unproductive and it shoots you in the foot and you only get more of what you are. Even if you are a real victim, it is extremely unproductive to identify with that. And the best books I've ever read on the subject of the victim mindset is the book called Bulletproof, which again refers to the bulletproof mind or the mental armor, is the book called Bulletproof by Evie Pomporis. Look it up. Highly recommend it. One of my favorite books. And in that book, I recall she and another person were victims of 9/11. They were both there. She moved on to become this really epic secret agent person. She was like a secret service agent. That's what she was. She was also a police officer and stuff like that. And she really moved on from 9/11. She just had, it never really came up in her mind really. But one of her colleagues or someone else in her life that was also at 9/11 was just completely traumatized by the event, and he let this trauma control his whole life. And this is kind of the problem with so many, even the people in the BPD and community and stuff like that. They really identify with this trauma, and you identifying with this trauma is literally keeping you stuck. You are not the trauma. You are not these things. I don't know what the hell your therapist is telling you, but you are not those things. Remember, you are a conscious entity occupying a human vessel. If you are looking at these things, these behaviors, you can even look at the thoughts. If you are observing something from a distance, you are not the thing that you are looking at. Thoughts, in case you need something quick and now. Some people have different terminology for it, like they're just your ants eating away at you. I think there was this guy called the Mindset Coach or something on YouTube. I don't know. But I tell you, in my experience, thoughts that you don't like, you can just look at them as flies. You know, what if this goes wrong? A fear-based thought. Oh, will that really work? A question a doubt disguised as a question type thought. They're like flies. They blow around and they just buzz on your windshield and they don't go away. They're annoying. You just shoo, fuck off. That's how you treat them. You say, fuck off. I don't identify with that. Go away. Now, we don't want to suppress our thoughts because then they compress, and things that compress over time eventually explode, like a volcano. The law of compound interest. So you have to find some type of way to vent these and release them so that they don't ricochet back to you and harm you. You have to find like a release where they can just kind of go down the drain. And I found that they're literally just clouds. Thoughts are literally... The Bible talks about consciousness being this water and this light. And that's kind of all you're doing. You're just swimming in these things, these identities, these thoughts. Consciousness is just full of all these millions of thoughts everywhere. Some come to your attention, some don't. And then when you see one that kind of acts like a fly, a doubt, a fear, just shoo it away. Recognize it's just a cloud. It's literally just a cloud. And it will disintegrate and it will pass away. But the thoughts that you do want and you do want to keep, the fish that you do catch, you can cast your net over them. You can write down the thoughts that you have in your diary so that you don't forget them, and then they're kind of with you forever. And if something resonates in your heart, it'll strike you because you will let it strike you. The only way for the doubts and the fears to strike you is if you let them. There's a book, I don't know if I've got the physical copy of the book with me, but there's a book about borderline personality disorder. And somewhere in the book, towards the end, it talks about a lighthouse. And I read the quote about this lighthouse, and it basically said, no one has permission to make you feel like crap without your consent. So the only person who has any control over you feeling like crap is yourself. Only you can consent to that. If someone's bullying you, a bit more of an extreme example, but if someone's treating you like shit, you don't have to respond by feeling like shit. You can only feel like shit if you give consent to feeling like shit. And preferably don't put yourself in a position where you're going to be treated like shit in the first place or attracting that shit. Again, blame falls a lot under the victim mindset. So there's different types of victim mindsets here, but blame is one of the biggest ones. Probably, if not the rest of them here, blame is the biggest. I don't really want to go over blame too much because you probably already may know what blame looks like and how damaging this blame can affect you, because blame affects everyone. Now, in terms of release, some people like to resort to blame very quickly because and I get the feeling, sometimes we blame other people in the moment, in the heat of battle, because we just want the pressure to get off us. We just want to go away from the thing that's feeling pain. But if you do that, just catch yourself, recognize that you do that, and try not to do that ever again. Refrain from blaming things. Don't let it be in your heart to automatically assign fault to things. And we'll get down to that later, down here at FAE bias, because that's what FAE bias is as well. Actually, you know what? I may as well bring it up now. The fundamental attribution error is one of the most toxic victim mindsets you could ever experience. Most people in the manifestation community, most people in avoidant attachment theory, most people in borderline like psychology, therapy, they don't talk about this. The fundamental attribution error is the number one victim mindset that you definitely need to get rid of. And what this does is it automatically attributes fault, which is another word for saying blame, to someone's inherent character. Now, when you see someone carrying out disproportionate behavior and actions, just like you yourself, it's much healthier to separate you from the action. Now, if you're an employer, right, for an example, and your employee is doing disproportionate things, I get that you can look at that person and say, what an absolute dipshit. And yes, we must look at people's actions to determine who they really are, because actions speak louder than words. But, however, that's only one aspect of the pie. There is more to the story. What about the underlying things? Because when you are doing something that is deemed as disproportionate, is it because you are inherently an evil, twisted, broken person? Or is it because in your mind, you had a justified reason? Some people like to call that an excuse. When you're driving down the freeway at a high speed, are you an asshole or do you have a justified reason? Likewise, when someone else is doing the same thing, are you quick to say, what an asshole? This is the most basic example of FAE bias. Or do you just recognize there may be another reason that you don't yet recognize or see yet as to why they're driving fast? So I highly recommend looking into this in your own spare time, FAE bias. Because when I did this, when I first learned about this, it went straight over my head. I didn't know what the hell this really meant. I didn't really understand the implications of this. Because even me telling you now, a lot of the stuff might just go over your head. And that's fine. What you've got to do is come back and investigate it and double check. And that's what I did to learn about FAE bias, because I was like, is this for real? I'll give you a real example, one of my own personal examples. I had a romantic interest who was kind of really like a lesbian, to be honest. I mean, we kind of were a thing for a little bit, but it didn't last long. She had a girlfriend of her own. Not the healthiest duo, I'll tell you that. And her so-called girlfriend sent me these really demonic texts at the time. Unfortunately, I do believe there was demonic influence being carried out at the time. However, I came to learn when I asked my sort of lesbian friend about that episode, those nasty, vicious texts that were being sent to me. My lesbian friend told me that her girlfriend was feeling disrespected. Now, right now, I probably couldn't care too much about that. But I realized, holy shit, FAE bias is a real thing. When someone lashed out, it wasn't because they were inherently trying to be vicious and malicious. It was because they were feeling threatened. They were feeling disrespected. Kind of like someone feeling like a dog that's being cornered. They're not trying to attack because that's who they want to be. They're attacking because they felt like they had no other choice. And this is what happens when relationships disintegrate, because they kind of feel like they don't have any other choice. They're stuck between a rock and a hard place. And so because they resort to the only option that they know how to use, that's what they're going to go for. Because if they've tried to go the easy way, it didn't work. Typically. And so, yeah, FAE bias, biggest victim mindset, hand in hand with blame, hand in hand with the victim mindset itself in just identifying with that shit, which all again goes back to the external locus, trying to control things outside of your control, instead of focusing on what's within your control, what's in your heart. All right, next victim mindset. I probably don't have a lot to say about this one at the moment, but there's this sort of like fear or idea of trying to be perfect. I don't really have a lot to say about that one, actually. I guess a lot of procrastination happens here, and you don't really see a lot of movement. And I suppose another angle of looking at perfection is like, there's really anxious people who just want to micromanage everything, especially if you grew up in a household like that. Oh, you're not allowed to eat more than, 100 grams of meat. Oh, no more than that. No more turning on the sink for more than, 5 seconds. Don't flush the toilet after doing a number one. Only do it after. Even worse, that micromanaging, you're just trying to be perfect. I actually think this can come from the scarcity mindset, which, have I written here actually, is something worth writing down. Lacking and scarcity. So if you're one of those people, you do not want to be having that weird perfectionist approach to things. You do not want to be micromanaging shit. And again, imagine you're trying to micromanage bullshit outside of your control. If anything that needs micromanaging, it's your own internal locus where you have a lot more control over it. And you can set your own internal world up like a Minecraft creation. Let's move on to another victim mindset, and that would be toxic hope. On the top of my head, I actually can't recall enough information on how to describe this one, but it's a real thing. It's kind of like wishing upon a star, but it's worse than that. Much worse than that. In this course, I'll probably include some playlists and extra videos that you can watch in addition to this, where I have kind of already mentioned subjects like this, and you can check those out. Well, I do go into a little bit more detail on these ones. But hope, it's not the same thing as faith necessarily. I think that it's like hope, I do know this, hope should only be like switched on, like onto the first degree. Kind of like the emotion of desire. You'll burn yourself out if you leave it on for too long, or if it's at a very high degree for too long. Like an oven stove, you turn the dial up. You turn the hope dial up way too much, you're going to burn yourself out and you're going to get hurt. Hope is a good sugar rush. It gets you moving. But the problem with hope, what I think here is you are attached to the outcome. You're hoping for the outcome, for an event, for a change, without having to do with the work. That's the problem with all this marketing bullshit. They say, how would you like to have this awesome thing without doing the thing that you don't want to do to get there? That's kind of the problem with hope. With experiments with hope, or maybe not experiments, just looking at rats, for example. If a rat is in a bucket of water and he can't escape from the bucket of water, if he feels like he has a chance of getting out, he will go on and on and on until he dies to the death, until he drowns. Because he has the hope. So you can see hope has a place. It really gets you moving, but it can't last long. And so when you're trying to keep the relationship healthy and well, you don't want to be relying on hope to keep this fire burning. Hope is a good sugar rush, like the rat swimming, trying to escape for 15 minutes straight. But it won't last long. It will burn out and it will die and you'll become too exhausted. Very much like sprinting. At some point, you're going to have to stop. The relationship cannot depend on the feeling of hope. It cannot depend on the emotion of hope. You cannot hope for the best in the sense that I hope that, it doesn't disintegrate. I hope that we'll be together forever. That hope, you're kind of latching onto that outcome. You're latching onto a narrative. This can come from a place of fear. There's another victim mindset called toxic positivity. I recommend looking that up. Toxic positivity. This is a typical thing that leftists do, actually, where they align themselves with this sort of moralist thinking, in a sense, with this social justice. All right, another victim mindset, self-flagellation. This is actually a very interesting word. It basically means to whip yourself. Don't do that. This can come in the form of guilt, shame. Basically, shame and guilt can be their own thing. But self-flagellation is an umbrella term that covers shame and guilt. And so when things don't go your way, do not beat yourself up. I understand with like driving instructing, for example, I sometimes see students who they fail to stop at a stop sign, right? And they just feel like crap after that. And it's okay to, you do feel the sting, and that's good. Now, if things don't go your way and you recognize that you've done something wrong, you'll feel the burn, and that's good. That's fine. And you're allowed to feel that way. But like the victim mindset, do not identify with that pain. You will then use that pain as fuel, as an energy source, as a lesson, as an opportunity to do better next time. That's what the whole point of the pain is. But you never deliberately try to beat yourself up. You never deliberately try to make a mistake so that, because you're a bad person who deserves it. No. Urgency. This is another type of victim mindset, actually. Never put yourself in a position where things become desperate. Because by doing that, you make things very hard on yourself. If you feel that you're losing the relationship, if you feel that things are not going your way, never ever panic. When you're driving on the road, you're cruising, like even if you're a learner driver, do not freak out. You must always remain calm under pressure. When we're learning how to do manual, for example, everyone's like, oh, worried about the cars behind you. I need to get moving. No. When you panic, when you feel this urgency, that actually makes things worse. So you have to get completely comfortable and sort of slow down time a little bit and patiently move slowly. There's actually a really cool saying, actually. Fast is slow and slow is smooth and smooth is fast. So you can see the law of the antithesis playing out there in an inverse correlation. Complacency and ignorance are two other victim mindsets. Complacency and ignorance. I wish I'd be able to talk a little bit more about ignorance. I just don't have the words for it right now. I think you kind of already know that ignorance is kind of like this deliberate idea of putting your head in the sand. You're choosing not to address problems. Now, you might have heard me say that, like, maybe we are creating the problems, and that maybe there's really no problem to begin at all, to exist, there's no problem to exist to begin with, but sometimes there is problems. And we could be completely ignorant of these problems, and that actually contributes to the creation and the compounding effect of a problem to emerge. Hence, that's why a relationship disintegrates, because we've been completely ignorant of these contributions that are within our control that we can change. If you are ignorant of these things, then surely it seems to me, in a very logical order, the relationship will disintegrate if we do these things of what not to do. Complacency. If we are ignorant to the fact that we may be complacent, like we never want to grow, we never want to change, we never want to adapt, we want to stay fixed, this can be dangerous. This can lead to the downfall of a relationship. Because a relationship in itself, though being an agreement, it is also this sort of living agreement. Kind of like the law, it's a statute, it's an inanimate, intangible object, but at the same time it's a living object because we give it life. And so is the relationship, especially a romantic one. And it's subject to modification, it's subject to change. Both parties in the relationship have the right to, terminate the relationship should they so choose to. But that's not something that you should be afraid of. You want the other party to feel like that they're not obligated to stay, but you shouldn't really give them a reason as to why they should leave. It should feel comfortable, but you shouldn't feel complacent. That's kind of like being in a job you hate. And I've seen so many people like this, like taxi drivers, for example. Some people have been taxi drivers for 15 years. I'm like, you really had nothing better to do in your life? You really didn't try and do anything else with your life? You're just completely dependent on this awful job. Taxi driving is an awful job. I was a taxi driver for 6-7 months. It was shit. I mean, it's not the worst thing in the world, but it's not going to be raising a family with that. Not really. That's why I went over to mechanics. That's why I went over to different things, including this. I'm not complacent. I go higher, I grow, I adapt. Although I've got my own personal flaws. So if there's an area of complacency that we need to address, don't be ignorant of that. Don't be ignorant to being toxically positive or toxically hopeful. Don't be a micromanager perfectionist. And if I haven't already mentioned it already, do not identify with your circumstances. This is actually the biggest one you'll see in the manifestation community. Do not identify with your circumstances. You'll often hear people say, the circumstances don't matter. That's one of the most confusing pieces of bullshit I've ever heard, because it's like, what the fuck do you even mean by circumstances don't matter? But what I think it really boils down to is, do not identify with your circumstances. And the reason circumstances don't matter is because if you created the circumstances from a radically accountable standpoint, then you have the power to change and or influence the circumstances. The circumstances don't define you, you define the circumstances. And so circumstances, it might be a bit of a tricky word to get your head around, but basically it can mean events, it can mean outcomes, it can literally mean ABC of what you're thinking about or what you're currently experiencing. So circumstances is really just a really vague umbrella term for the problems that you might be suffering. I guess another synonym for circumstances is just problems. But you must not identify with your problems. You must not identify with your circumstances. And do not fear your circumstances. If you are concerned that someone is, cheating or behaving in a disproportionate manner, even right now myself, I like to pray about my romantic interest, right? Even if she was cheating and doing disproportionate things right now, I would be seeing in my own imagination and believing that she actually wants to be with me. Now that might seem really delusional, but understand from a Neville Goddardian perspective, this is the most practical thing you can do because it is you creating and causing, from a radically accountable standpoint, your own romantic interest carrying out disproportionate behavior to begin with. You attracted that type of bullshit in your life to begin with because it was already in your heart. And so you just have to change what's inside of your heart. And by changing what's inside of your heart, you change the circumstances. You change the reflection. And the best way to change your reflection is when you look at the reflection, the mirror, the world, the outside world, the external locus, which is a reflection of the internal locus. You might have heard you don't scrub the mirror. You don't do any third dimensional action to modify it. Instead, you look at yourself like, is that me? You've got some cream on your face and you're like, is that me? Shit, I gotta clean that up. And you go clean up. You know what to do. This is the feeling I want you to take away. You know what to do as soon as you see that whipped cream on your face. And that's the feeling I want you to take away for every problem, every circumstance. Go in within your own heart and resolve whatever's in there. The Bible says something about lay on your bed and converse with your heart. Here's another victim mindset. It's a little bit under the complacency section. You feel good enough. That's good enough. Like you're kind of just lazy. You don't really put in any effort. I would describe that as really just laziness. Laziness is probably a bit of a victim mindset. But another victim mindset is feeling like you're not good enough inherently. And this eats away at you. Because you believe this, because you believe you need the permission, you don't need anyone's permission. The only permission you need is you give yourself the permission. It's like asking, am I allowed to do this? Am I allowed to do that? The answer is yes, actually. You are allowed to do this. You are allowed to do that. Not anything that would cause you trouble in the sense like creeping up to your romantic interest house at night and trying to do something weird. I mean, you have permission to basically do anything that does not compromise your own integrity. I understand that this one can be very challenging to wrap your head around, but it's worth looking into. Just understand that I'm only going over this briefly and just by the top of my head, and feeling not good enough is inherently a victim mindset. Some people might even say that's under the umbrella term of self-flagellation. But we want to be much more specific about what terms we're using and what feelings are swimming around in our heart, because if we can identify what these feelings are, then we have a much better chance at knowing what to do. Because if you don't know what you're looking at, how do you know what to do next? Another victim mindset is not having or seeing opportunities. There is a book I probably would recommend. It's not the most amazing book I've ever read, but it's called The Obstacle is the Way, which is referring to Emperor Tiberius, I think his name was, I can't remember his name, who said the obstacle is the way. For every problem is a solution, essentially. The problem is the solution. But the only way you're going to be seeing opportunities is if you are already practicing seeing opportunities. Now, if your romantic interest has blocked you, for example, what's the opportunity in that? Well, the opportunity, it's not to go sneaking up behind the house at night and seeing what they're up to. That's not the opportunity, because that's detrimental to your integrity and your reputation. The opportunity has to reinforce your integrity and interpretation, your integrity and reputation. So the opportunity will be determining how we respond. How we respond sets the stage moving forward. So that's the opportunity. That's always the opportunity. Or many times that is the opportunity. There's lots of different opportunities. Here's a funny joke. Drinking problem, drinking solution. It's a bit of a pun, because I think people can misinterpret what looking for opportunities means, or not seeing any opportunities at all. So if someone says, you've got a drinking problem, the opportunity is to do anything else other than drinking. The opportunity is to learn. Typically, the opportunity is to learn. The opportunity is to practice. The opportunity is not to keep doing more of the same. The opportunity is to keep doing more of the same if it reinforces your structural integrity. And if you really want to be an alcoholic, then sure, keep going for it. And last but not least, self-sabotage. We probably kind of already touched up on that, but yeah, self-sabotage. I don't know if it's specifically a victim mindset, but it is a system in itself where, because obviously you would feel like a victim, that's already an act of self-sabotage. If you're ignorant, that's an act of self-sabotage. If you're always focusing on your problems instead of the opportunities to learn, instead of the opportunities to grow, cap on growth, by the way, because I don't want to throw you into the hustle culture, which never turns that off. Know your limits. Take 2 steps forward and then take another step back. Don't keep the oven on the whole time and keep trying to boil in the water. You've got to turn the stove off at some point and then cook another meal after that. Just 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That's the law of rhythm from the book of the Kabbalion. That is the end of this lesson. I hope you learned something new there. I'll see you in episode 3.